up, everybody, and welcome into the H&M Trucking Podcast for episode 70 of our little podcast that could. I'm your host, Marcus. Thank you so much for being here today. Listen, we have had some incredible success on this podcast over the last, even going back to our 50th episode anniversary, and a lot of great input from drivers and office staff employees, a lot of great contributions from drivers and office staff employees, and that just warms my heart like you can't believe. So I don't want to leave that, because what I'm about to say here, I don't want what I'm about to say to undersell what I just said, okay? The drivers, the office staff members, the people that we really depend on for this podcast have come through with flying colors. We always have something to talk about. We've always got topics, whether they're fun or serious. We are always flush with content, and I really appreciate that. Now, a couple weeks ago, Eve got in touch with me and told me, hey, we have some changes here happening within the company that we would like to address on the podcast. And when she told me what those changes entailed, I was just smitten. And not to say that I'm happy, because the changes, they don't affect me, okay? This is something that happens within H&M. The reason I was happy is because Eve thought of the podcast. She said, this is perfect for the podcast. That's what I'm really excited about here. This podcast, yeah, it can entertain you. We can have a lot of fun and do a you can't make this shit up episode, and we'll laugh for an entire hour until our face hurts. But we also have the episodes like our speeding episode, or like our episodes on the freight market, that are heavy on the information, and they are meant to give drivers and office staff that might be listening alike a chance to peek behind the curtain a little bit, see what's going on behind the scenes. And this episode is going to be one of those episodes. I'm going to speak with Denny, of course, my awesome co-host, who is a former H&M driver, as you all know, and Eve Essary and James Fonda here just around the corner to talk about these changes. I'm not going to tease them at all, because I want you guys to hear it directly from the authority within the company, which is, of course, Eve and James. And then the cool part about this, too, is that Denny is going to look at this as if he was a current driver, and he's going to put himself right back in the shoes that he wore before he retired, and think about this from the standpoint of, if I was driving for H&M right now, these are the questions that I would have based on hearing these changes. So it's a great interview, okay? It's meant to make sure that you are getting complete transparency from the company, and that is something that you will hear James address within this interview. It is something that the company prides themselves on, transparency. And, we will talk about it here, but James, one of the few owners of a trucking fleet the size of H&M that I know that everybody in the company has his personal cell phone number. His office is not closed off. You can drop by and talk to him whenever. And that's kind of a big part of this whole interview. That's one of the reasons that we're doing this. Complete transparency. Let's get all the gossip off the board. Let's make sure that everybody knows exactly what the changes are, so that there's not a bunch of misinformation floating around out there. And I think we did a really good job with it this time. Not to throw my shoulder out, patting myself on the back, but hey, I'm going to pat myself on the back here, and a long distance pat on the back for Denny Stone as well. Because I think that this is exactly what we can use this podcast for and be very effective with. You're going to get some great information coming here from James and Eve right now, straight from the horse's mouth. Not the donkey's mouth. That's me. Not the ass's mouth. That's me. Okay. But from the authority of the company, and James is going to give you some real great insight into why these decisions were made, not only the decisions that were made. So here it is, mine and Denny's interview with James Fonda and Eve Essary.
From Omaha, Nebraska, to whatever lane you're driving, this is the H&M Trucking Podcast with your host, Marcus Bridges.
All right, Denny, we are joined here on the H&M Trucking Podcast by two very important pieces of the H&M Trucking Podcast. We've got Eve Essary in the house. Welcome back, Eve. Always great to have you.
Hello.
Hey, Eve.
And, of course, we've got the president of H&M Trucking joining us for this little chat here. We've got James Fonda in the room as well. James, it's always good to have you here on the podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
Thanks for having me again.
Of course. Sometimes I don't know if that's a real genuine or if you're like, thanks for having me again. Damn it. But we really do appreciate the time, all jokes aside. So listen, I know we've got something pretty serious to talk about here, and that's why we wanted to bring you guys on. There's been some adjustments made within the company, and we wanted to get out in front of any gossip or anything like that, any games of telephone that might happen, and get you guys accurate information from the people that are involved in making the decisions. So that's why James and Eve are here today. And I'm just going to go ahead and turn it over to you guys. What's changed? What is it that you would like to present us with here today?
So September 1st, we are going to do an adjustment to driver compensation on new incoming drivers. It will only affect people that we hire in the future, not drivers that are currently with us. We've never made a difference like that in H&M's history. We've always just left it, stayed it. So this one, we're going to lower driver pay for incoming drivers by 5 cents per mile. So it'll go from 60 cents back to 55 plus their 4 cents bonus. So they'll still get the bonus, but it's taking that base level and resetting the base level back to 55. Again, it's not going to affect any drivers that are currently with H&M. They'll stay on their normal pay scale, has to raise per year up to 10 years. But if they leave, which we often have happen and come back, they will forfeit that grandfathered in pay scale and they'll go to the new pay scale. Now, then we'll renegotiate the pay scale based on how the industry does. So like 2018, 2019, 2020, 21, 22, I was pretty aggressive in giving raises and keeping up with the market. So now the market is telling us that there's been market pressure for now 2 years. I don't see the market pressure stopping for at least another year next July. So there's driver availability out there. It's no different than we negotiate for an equipment cost, right? When equipment's in high demand, the price go up. When it's low demand, the price go down. So trucks, trailers. Same with office staff, right? Like the people we've hired. Back in 22, it was more expensive to hire an employee than it has been for 2 years now. And for drivers, I just left it alone because I'm like, the market's gonna eventually correct. No one saw the market just sitting here for 2 years. So no trucking company is going to be able to get what the market is saying they want right now for rates. No trucking company can get there, but we can meet there the way back up. So with that, we're just going September 1st going forward for new drivers come in. And we approximately bring in like 12 drivers a month. And the reason we bring in drivers is, people, they either get terminated, right, of the LEGO for speeding or whatever reason, medical issues, they resign or they're forced to resign or they just resign normally. So typically we have 2.5 drivers. You can, maybe it doesn't happen every week, but it always comes about 12 drivers a month. So, what does that mean to the bottom line? Well, it's $500 a driver per driver. Replace 12 drivers, that's $6,000 a month, 6, 12, 18 in compounds. So I actually wanted to do this early 23 when other companies like Crete and other carriers were doing it. I got some pushback from the internal people around me. So I decided to hold off. And then I brought it up again in February of this year. And then still not everybody was on board. And I'm not trying to do something that not everybody's on board with. But now it's either going to be now or never that we do it because it's just now or never. So we're going to decrease it for the sake of just getting back to where the market's at.
Okay. And I think the really important points there are that this does not affect our new drivers unless they leave and come back to the company. I think that's probably one of the biggest concerns is that when you hear about a pay adjustment anywhere, you automatically are worried that it's going to affect you. Right. But this is a very important aspect here. This is new drivers only.
No different than an employee, right? Like when I'm hiring employees cheaper now for the last 2 years, it's not like I went out and then decreased employee. When I would say employee, because drivers are employees too, but I'm saying office staff. It's not like I came back and lowered their pay. No,
exactly.
It just new people coming on board. I'm able to hire cheaper, so I'm going to take advantage of the marketplace, and we're going to hire cheaper.
Absolutely. Understood.
They're not because we have to. Like the market tells us, they want the rates back at 2012 levels. Well, I'm not gonna get back to 2012, but I get maybe back to like 2021,
Right.
22.
Right. You're making your way back there as far as you can. Now, obviously, we talk about company health on this podcast whenever we have you on here, and we've heard in the past, hey, the company's still healthy, the company's doing well. I know that's something that drivers are concerned about. They want to hear that the company's healthy, and this isn't something that is happening because you're feeling such a big squeeze that it's threatening the larger operation. But that mindset that you talked about, kind of, you've been thinking about it for a little while, and now it's something that has to happen. It's now or never. Is this largely or completely brought on by the freight market squeeze that we've all been feeling here for the last 2+ years? I mean, we've talked about it on this podcast, multiple episodes. It's a bad market. Everybody's feeling it. You're seeing it across the board for every company out there. Is it fair to say that is what brought this on more than anything else?
Well, you're just trying to maintain competitiveness, right? You're trying to, let's say when we go back into bidding rates again, right? We go back to bid contracts. It allows us to continue to be more competitive, which in the end helps drivers because that means we're getting more loads, more freight, more, right? You're not taking the broker, you're going after customer freight, whatever. So it allows us to still maintain competitiveness, which in the end would help the driver.
Absolutely.
So as far as financial stability, yeah, we're fine. But it's just like, do we need to do this and just continue to suck wind, or should we make small changes along the way and make it not more palatable? So,
absolutely.
it's not like I'm selling the company anytime soon. So
you're sticking around. You like what's going on. Just adjustments. Yeah, and these are the things. This is the ebb and flow of business, right? It's good when it's good. It's bad when it's bad, and we make the necessary adjustments to get it back to good.
In trucking, you're literally attached to the market. So The market goes up, it's great. Market goes down, guess what? Right? And you got to make adjustments up and down. We've never seen something like this for such a prolonged period. So it's just kind of uncharted territory. And I mean, Derek Leathers, the CEO of Warner, came out a couple weeks ago and said, "This has been as close to hell as I ever want to experience." And when my friend was at a conference, he's like, "I immediately thought of you." I'm like, "That's so sweet. That's where you think of me." But as for financial stability, there's nothing to be concerned about. We just replaced like 3/4 of the fleet, maybe not 60% of it. Next year we only have to buy 37 trucks. The year after that, 37 trucks. I mean, come January 1st, it's kind of kick back and just monitor the waters. But it's at that point we've made so many changes in the last 2 years that it's just more of just monitoring what's going on.
Absolutely. Now, Eve, I know that you're here kind of to keep the lasso on all of us, make sure that we are staying within the confines of the things that we're supposed to talk about. But before I go to Denny for his thoughts on this, I do want to see if you have anything to add. I know you've got a ton of notes. We've been talking about doing this interview here for a week or so. So I don't want to leave you out here. Is there anything else that you've got written down there that you want to share before we start to kind of kick it around with Denny?
Yeah, just a couple of things. First, if anybody has any questions, feel free to call us. Okay. So call me, call James, call your dispatcher. They'll get you over to us. We're just trying to be really transparent about what we're doing and why. I think that that's important. It's important so that everybody knows and everybody's on the same page. So, and that's one of the reasons that we're doing this podcast, just because we're going to meet it head on. We're not doing anything behind the scenes that we're not going to own and know that this is ultimately it. We believe in it and we believe that it's the right thing to do right now for the company. So that's the main point. And then just as drivers are referring other drivers, we do get a lot of our recruiting as driver referrals. So that's the other reason that we wanted to make sure that we put this out there, because when drivers are referring, they need to make sure that they know and that they're telling their friends that we're starting at 55 cents now instead of 60.
Yep. And those driver referrals are important. I know that there's good drivers
Absolutely.
that come to you by way of other drivers. So we want to make sure and get the accurate information out to the people that we're pitching the company to effectively.
And we don't want to, and with the recruiting girls, we don't want to confuse the guys we're recruiting. That's why we're throwing the ball out so far. It's like, all right, we're giving the girls an opportunity to change change who when the next group of people they're talking to, now they can start saying that. So it's not, you don't have a guy that was like caught in the middle.
Right.
Now you might have one guy right from 3 months ago that calls like, hey, now I want to join. Well, okay, well, just a heads up, it's 55 cents plus bonus instead of that 60. But in orientation, I go to talk with the drivers, and I go introduce myself for the most part. Yeah, no, I'll ask them. I say, okay, where did you come from? And once in a while, I'll say, hey, what were you getting? What was your compensation at the last place? And I mean, that 52 to 55 pretty much seems to be what I'm hearing. Now you'll see once in a while you hear like a 49, 48, but I think those days are kind of over. But you're still seeing like, okay, we're still in that top. I don't want to be at the top pay, right? Like I want to be somewhere in that 75 percentile. But it's comforting. I would have made this decision if I wasn't A, listening to everybody around me and if they were comfortable with it, and B, listening to the drivers as they're coming in and saying, what were you getting paid at? Well, if I know that my pay at 55 plus 4 is still very competitive, well, then I'm very comfortable with that.
Absolutely. Denny, I want to go to you here. You're obviously worked for H&M for 10 good long years. You retired as a driver for H&M. What goes through your mind when you hear what Eve and James are talking about here with the new driver pay adjustments?
Actually, I put down 3 things to mention. First of all, I would be concerned, is that going to affect the quality of new hires? That's question number 1. Question number 2, if someone had to quit, come back, take a leave of absence, whatever you want to call it, the correct verbiage or syntax there, but say somebody had a health issue or had to go on maternity leave, are they going to have to come back at the lower rate, or are they going to retain that rate? And the last thing, I would think that this could possibly help with retention. If a driver was thinking about going across the street to another company, but then they knew if that didn't work out and they wanted to come back, they're going to have to take a cut, that might actually keep drivers here. Those are my 3 thoughts. Tell me what you think.
So number 1 was, now I'm thinking about number 3 because we talked about that. What was number 1 again?
You can only do one thing at a time, Denny.
Stop.
You got to go.
Yeah, let's bullet point this list.
One was quality of driver. We're not going to change any standard of quality of driver. We never have.
Yeah.
Like that's what our set, as our captain sets. We don't change what the standard of the driver coming in.
Our qualifications are our qualifications. Those aren't changing.
So if all of a sudden we can't hire a 55 plus 4, then we're doing something wrong. Like it just is, then we'll make adjustments. And that's what this leaves us room to do, is just make adjustments. We're going to start here and we're going to see where it ends up. But everything on the street shows driver availability. We have more drivers that want to come than we have trucks. But I'm still very comfortable in that window.
When we're talking about leave of absence, and all that, I can kind of talk to that a little bit. So there's different kinds of leave of absence. So a driver with a medical issue that gets FMLA, they get a 3-month leave, a 12-week leave, right? And they're going to come back at the same rate. If we have another driver that, let's say that it's going to be past that 12 weeks, he ends up having to resign for medical reasons, and then it's another couple of weeks or it's a month or whatever, we're going to look at those and we're going to make adjustments and we're going to do what's right. Like that's the thing about H&M, is we do what's right. Yeah. And I think we do what's right for people. So I don't think that that's necessarily a black and white question, Denny, when you're talking about it, because I think it depends on the reason. Did they just leave because they thought that the grass was greener and they're going to, go across the street? Then those are the people that are going to probably come back at 55 cents. But if there's a legitimate medical issue, a maternity leave, that would be, we would give a 12-week FMLA leave for that. And if they needed more time, depending on what that looked like, we allow for that. Like we are not real sticklers as far as, this is what we do and it's the same for everybody, because people live in the gray area, right? And so what is right for one person isn't necessarily right for all of them. So we'll make those determinations and judgment calls as we go.
Sure. Case by case basis, which seems to be the best way to go about it, because that way we talk about all the time on this podcast. It's like a family here. We feel like family. We feel like we're treated like people and not like numbers. That right there is how you treat someone like a person and not like a number. I don't think that there's any better examples. Sorry.
I'm not trying to ruin someone's life. It's giving, you also want to communicate, which is the reason for the podcast, on what we're doing, so you understand, these are, for the guy that's like, oh, I'm just gonna quit, and then turns around 2 months later, it's like, hey, I want to come back. I made the wrong decision. And it happens all the time.
Mhm.
And you're like, well,
Sorry.
that's now, just heads up. So go to your retention question. Yeah, that was 100% one of my thinkings as well. It's like, yeah, this might be a consequence of this might help retention. No, it's still not going to change the guy that has a medical incident. It's still not going to stop the guy that gets a speeding ticket or something that I would have terminated him for. But as the guys that are just leaving just to leave to see if grass is greener, that might stop them. But right now, like all my buddies who are across the spectrum on all different types of freight, everybody is sitting there beating their head against the wall. And no one's having a good time with it. So if you want to go back to someone, that's what a lot of these guys that come back like, well, it wasn't what we thought or whatnot. So I'm very open. I'm very transparent with it with anybody. So my desk's in the middle of the office for a reason. Come talk to me.
Right. No walls,
I said
no
that
doors.
about trucking companies for a long time. My husband's a driver, and so I dealt with trucking companies on the other side of things, being that my husband was working and I'm, with the kids, and I'm, also working, but still at home, right? And so, they'll tell you whatever they want to tell you to get you in the door, promise you everything under the sun, tell you what you want to hear. And then when it actually comes time to pay the piper, that's when everything changes. And that H&M's not like that. And so I think that reputation and that relationship will show through this whole thing.
Absolutely. Yeah. I really, when you guys, reached out and wanted to talk about this on the podcast, it absolutely warmed my heart because, we have some fun on the podcast. We had a great time with our You Can't Make This Shit Up episode a couple weeks ago. There's some times when we get to really enjoy and poke around and find out how entertaining we can be. But at the end of the day, this podcast is meant for this type of message, getting accurate information out to the drivers, curbing that gossip, making sure everybody understands that you're not trying to operate behind the scenes. You're not trying to pull the wool over anybody's eyes. You're making good decisions for a good company that's got a bunch of good employees, and you're doing that because you're trying to keep that standard and hold it. And that's sometimes not as easy as it has been in past years. James, I was going to ask you on the banging your head against the wall note, have you taken on any new hobbies to get that frustration out? Is there a new punching bag in your house? Have you taken to shooting archery at rodents, anything like that?
Maybe I should.
Well, I don't know.
Maybe I'll play you in NCAA football, but that might piss me off more.
That will definitely not be good for morale, James. I've been practicing.
I don't have enough time to be as committed as you are.
Yep, no, it's true, man. But thank you guys, because I feel like it does add a lot of legitimacy to the podcast. We want to be able to get these messages out and make sure that they're accurate and informative. And, it's one of the big reasons that bringing Denny on was so important, is because we get his perspective on what it's like sitting in the truck cab and hearing this type of stuff and wondering, okay, this is what comes to mind. Denny, I'll go back to you because I know you've probably had thoughts since you issued your questions. Anything that you want to field here to James and Eve while we've still got them on?
No, I was very happy all of my years at H&M. There were hard days. I won't deny that. There were days that were frustrating. But overall, H&M always treated me right. And, the pay, yeah, there are other companies that'll promise you more per mile, but do you get the consistent miles? I got consistent miles. I made a good paycheck. Yeah, there were weeks that weren't as good as other weeks, but, luckily I wasn't living paycheck to paycheck, and I would go back and average 6 months at a time and say, okay, we're doing all right. And the other thing that has always been most important to me was home time. And H&M always got me home, which other companies did not. So my hat's off to you. Just keep doing what you're doing. Keep treating the drivers right. Keep knowing them by name and not by number. It does make a difference from our end.
And I hope to keep that as well. Like I would say it's more difficult now as the company grew over the years, but make a concerted effort to make sure, at least give them the time of day if they come to my desk or like I said, we only have like 4 or 5 people in orientation. So I can go in and ask questions, and some guys will stay quiet and some guys will tell you their whole life story. So I think, and again, I believe in transparency. So, if someone has a question on why we're doing this, or, I'm just adjusting to the market at the end of the day. And I see a place where we can make an adjustment. So I'm going to do so. And, as I joked with Eve, I said, we don't do easy. Like this, there's easy roads and there's hard roads, and we're not going to take
It's
these.
not my favorite quote, James.
It could be. We're working.
I was looking for
we're
the
working
easy button. All of a sudden, there's not one. I don't know. I thought we were going towards that route.
We're working on it.
He told me we were going to coast through 25, and all of a sudden, we don't do easy.
Well, it's 2025 yet. We
Oh.
we already coast in 2025.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
We're not
Coasting
there yet.
25. I mean, guys, we look at 37 trucks per year for 2 years for a 2.5 year window. So for 30 months, we'll have to only replace what we would normally replace in a 12-month window. Like, just think about that for a second. I can't even really understand that yet. Like, for us to do like 10 trucks in one quarter, that's all we'll have to replace. Like, 10, and 17. Like, everybody's gonna be like, oh, like that's all. And then it's gonna be like, okay, well, that was an easy year. And we're gonna do it again. The market, that will give us time to say, okay, well, we're gonna let this market come right back to us. Because when I go to back to negotiate, when I go back to Volvo and say, well, I want to buy 37 trucks this year. So if you want to be part of that 37, you better get competitive. And they got that new truck coming out. They're pretty proud of it. So, and I'm not going to be the only carrier that doesn't have to buy a bunch of equipment next year. There'll be tons of them out there.
Right.
Now, there are tons of them that haven't replaced, like Heartland. They came out posted that they've got an agent fleet, they're not on their normal trade cycle. Well, now I can say, like, next year, on those 37 trucks, charity in the two 20s, just because they're lower miles, but the rest will be at that normal trade cycle of 440,000 miles, 450, 430 in that range. And, what a life to be back in the world prior to 2020 for the first time, in 2025.
Been a long time coming, and
a long road. I turned gray in that turn. Like, you go look at me 2019 and then look at now, I might
Lots
have
of gray.
you. Oh man, gray and abused and beaten.
Oh, poor James.
And Jackson says I'm not an optimist. Like, so.
Oh man, you're getting it from every angle, James. And
I am.
I wanted to tell you, while there is no easy button, we have installed a hard button on your desk. It's a thumbtack, and you're welcome to slam your hand down on it whenever you want. Okay? It's another thing.
Every time James walks in and says, I have an idea.
All right, so we've covered the new driver pay here pretty extensively. There is one more thing that we want to bring up on this podcast episode before we let Eve and James go get back to not doing things the easy way. We had an adjustment with the Southeast division that was made recently as well. James, can you talk to me about that?
Yeah, so no different than what we're making adjustments on the incoming for the OTR guys. The rates in the Southeast have been abysmal for a long time. And again, I was holding to, because again, we have the financial capability to sit there and hold. But at some point you're like, well, why are we holding if I don't see this thing turning around anytime soon? If it was like, okay, I could see this window is turning in 3 or 4 months, then sure. But I just don't see that. It's just a simple numbers decision, right? Like the OTR rate is significantly better than the Southeast rate. We'll give those drivers the option to move to the OTR fleet and then go from there. So.
And it sounds like, from what I understand, that some of them took that opportunity and others decided to go their separate ways. And
I was actually surprised. 80% of them stayed.
That's amazing.
So, and we kept the Midwest regional. So, I'm very pleased with the direction that we're heading in now. Brian actually just texted me this morning on the side. He's like, you hear our department? Can you see like the upbeatness of them lately? And I'm like, well, it's one department. It's that way.
One at a time. One at a time.
Yeah, one at a time, right? But yeah, so it was a quick blowover at the end of the day. Change is never fun to the degree. Like some change, it all takes some degree of working through something. But once you get used to change, as long as you don't blindside people with it, you're pretty okay. When people can see the writing on the wall for that Southeast has been in for a long time, but it might make like another huge drastic change like that. Like now, like the lowering of new driver pay, like to me, that's not that drastic of change because it does not impact anybody else except for drivers that are currently not hired past, right? Like that's just when they started. It's just typically not something that in the trucking world that you maneuver up and down. Mm-hmm. I think like when Crete did their 5 cent, they did it like a 6-month temporary 5 cent. So when they pulled it back early 23, I think it was, there wasn't, it's like, well, they already had the verbiage that says this was only temporary. Or when I put it in there, it's like, no, like this is your pay. Like, so I'm not going to take back your pay.
Right.
Like that. So,
Well, I think one really important aspect here to highlight is that 80% retention rate from, dissolving the Southeast Division. That speaks to the company culture. That speaks to what we're talking about. People, not numbers.
I think that really speaks a lot to that team over there, to Lindsay, Tim Gray, Monica, and how well they communicated with their drivers, what that relationship looked like, that those drivers were willing to make that change and really give up some home time in order to stay with H&M. So, and that's significant and appreciated. And I know that that's not an easy decision for them or their families to make. So just making sure that we are recognizing that, and that they did choose to stay with us, even though that we had made that change for them.
yeah. Again, it all comes from the same communication, right? Like Lindsay and Brian called each and every driver, had a good conversation. I can't call and tell each and every driver about this change we're doing on the pay, but I can tell them because it doesn't really affect them other than they just know. So I think, good communication, team, trusting, transparency, all that goes into it, as Jenny said too, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
Treat people right at the end of the day, it'll all work out.
Well, and I mean, strike it down in the win column, that 80% retention rate that you spoke of, that saves a lot of money too in the long run, because if you had to turn around and hire a bunch more new drivers, yeah, it's like, okay, well, now we've got to go through the whole process. That involves a lot of people, that involves orientation and training. Being able to just kind of almost like just slip these guys over from one region to the next, and they want to stay there. It's all good things, and these are all decisions being made for the health of the company, and they're going to, and in some cases already have started to pay off. So, and I'm a gambling man. I've told you that before. I'm still putting my money on whatever James says about the market, and he said right now that we're not seeing it turn around anytime soon. So I'm not even going to ask you for another assessment of it. I'm just going to ask you to call me when it does finally turn around so I can shift my bets, okay? Because I'm trying to make a little money on the side here.
It sounds like they're going to do a rate decrease in September, so you might see it coming down maybe October, December, November, or not right.
Okay, all right. Well, we will definitely keep you guys on the horn here, and anytime we've got something else like this, we're going to get in touch with James and Eve and have one of these conversations. Denny, I want to give you a chance for any final thoughts before we let Eve and James go, because I know they're busy. They got a lot of hard stuff they got to get to.
No, pretty much summed it up, answered my questions. Thank you.
Great.
Yep. Yeah, so I would reiterate to all the drivers, you'll all have my cell phone. Yep. You all have Eve's number. We know where we sit. So if you have more questions, feel free to ask. I'm not gonna try to hide. I'll tell you what's going on in the marketplace. So
that's simple. Well, James, Fonda, Eve Essary, it's always a pleasure, especially getting you guys in here together. We really appreciate the time today. Thank you for being here, and we'll talk to you again soon. Well, Denny, really appreciative of the time that James and Eve came and spent here with us on the podcast. And also, I mentioned this in the interview, and I want to bounce it off of you to see what you think. But like I said, it really warmed my heart that we were the first thought that they had when it came to, hey, we're going to talk about this. We want to be transparent. Let's use the podcast. Feels like what it's intended for. And while we do get to have some fun, we're going to have some serious conversations on here from time to time. And this one, I think, was the best possible use of the podcast to get in front of the gossip.
True. And, people are going to hear change in pay, and they're going to think pay cut. They're going to, any number of things. So please, read past the headline when you hear about this, or somebody posts something about it on Facebook. Read past that initial headline and dig into it, find out what this is really all about, because this is not going to affect you unless you're a new hire. That's the bottom line.
And it might actually change some people's minds about moves that they were thinking about making. I do think that one thing we didn't really, it was mentioned, but it wasn't something that we really hammered on much, is that a lot of these companies that tell you that the grass is greener on the other side are only telling you that to get you out the door of the company you're in and into their door. We've had multiple drivers on this podcast tell us that most of those are bait and switch type situations, Denny, and I'm sure you can speak to that too.
Well, yeah, exactly. I checked into a number of times because I would, long-time driver with a good record, I'd be approached. I'd be, I wouldn't say wined and dined because they didn't come take me out to eat and stuff, but they'd be talking to me and promising me good things, telling me how great this company was and how they were going to pay me 85 cents a mile or something, and it's like, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And even if it's competitive on the high scale, you've got to consider that, yeah, they may be selling you 70 cents a mile, but if you don't get the miles, if you don't consistently get the miles, if they don't get you home, which is a priority with me, and I would think most drivers, because it's hard to maintain that connection with your family and your loved ones and friends on the road. So if you don't get home when you're supposed to get home, you can't make any plans. You can't say, hey, next door neighbor or best friend or whatever, let's go to the game or let's go do this. And then you find out, oh, nope, they're not going to get me home. So you got to cancel those plans. So people are reluctant to make any plans with you. So with H&M, they dependably get you home on time when you're supposed to be. And, like I said during the interview, I don't look at week to week. A lot of guys do. They look at per mile or per day or per week. I averaged out on no less than 3 months, usually 6 months and sometimes 12 months. And I'd look back and say, okay, how am I doing week to week over this term? And always it was good. It was acceptable, because there are weeks that are going to be frustrating. You're going to sit, you're going to think, I'm not making any money. But then you forget, 5 weeks ago, you had a week to beat the band. It was great. So you take those and you average them out, and H&M will give you good pay.
Absolutely. And treat you well, because that's another thing that
Yes.
when you're thinking about jumping ship and heading to another place, you don't know that you're going to have the relationship that you've built with your dispatcher at H&M. You don't know that the president of the company is going to sit right in the middle of the terminal with a wide open door. In fact, no walls even around his office. Or are you going to get his personal cell phone number like you all have so that you can call him and ask him about something like this? It's not every company that runs in this fashion, and there are more things than just the pay that go into it, especially when you talk about the ripple effect. Because, let's talk about our health for a second as drivers here. If you're not getting the home time that you thought you were going to get, and you're not making as many miles as you thought you were going to, and you're canceling plans with all your friends and loved ones, what's that going to do for your stress level behind the wheel of an 80,000-pound vehicle? And are you going to be having second thoughts after you cancel those plans the second, third, or fourth time? The answer is probably yes. I don't have the experience, but I can tell you right now that it would take one hell of a resilient person to put up with all of that garbage, knowing that you left a place that didn't put you through all of that,
Yep. And the equipment. I mean, H&M's the first company that I had a freezer, so I could actually bring leftovers and keep them for a reasonable amount of time. They're the only ones that ever provided satellite radio, which, if you're traveling coast to coast, trying to find radio stations from one town to another is just impossible. God, I would hate to have to do that. I mean, that brings to mind the old Clear Channel stations from back when everybody was listening to Bill Mack and, the few stations that would get Canada to Mexico and coast to coast. But, those are non-existent anymore anyway. Any AM station that's Clear Channel, so to speak, is not Clear Channel Communications, but I mean, that had that Clear Channel power that could cover that ground. They've probably all gone to talk radio by now. So having that satellite radio is definitely a bonus, and the equipment is maintained. We've talked about all these things before, but everything adds up to having a happy, or as happy as you can, a life on the road.
Absolutely. It's way more than just one brick that builds this house, for sure. And you got to think about that stuff before somebody dangles that carrot on the stick out in front of you. And I think it's very sage advice from Denny here, saying, listen, if it sounds too good to be true, it probably is. And not like, oh, it might be. No, it's probably not, because there aren't companies out here beating the market and staying afloat at that rate. It's just not happening. Otherwise, H&M would be doing it, right? If it was possible to do, because of the way they care about their employees. So Good stuff here today, and hope that, as Denny said, you mentioned something that I think is really important too, and I just want to hammer it home one more time. Pass the headline along, or pass the headline is what Denny said. Read past the headline. Also, pass our headline here on. Anybody can listen to this podcast. It's not limited just to H&M drivers, but anybody can listen to it that wants the word from the mouth of the person that decided and made the decision with all of their other co-workers there, and that's James. And I mean, you can't get a clearer message than when he comes and sits right next to us and tells us exactly why things are the way they are. So don't only read past the headline, but if you hear somebody gossiping about it and passing on misinformation, be a part of the solution there and tell them, hey, I don't think that's the way it was. Listen to the podcast, or just tell them to call James. I don't care if they listen to the podcast. We're here to curb some gossip and get you accurate information, and now the information's out there. So that's the most important thing, and for us to be able to be involved in it, I just can't thank H&M enough for giving us the opportunity to, be here and do this as a job. It's still something that I can't believe I get paid for most days, and we do have a lot of fun on this podcast. We can use it as the tool that it has been built into as well, though, and I think today is a great example of that. So without any further ado, we're going to go ahead and put a bow on this thing and wrap it up for Denny Stone. What's
Say
that?
The cheese thing.
I
Say
will,
the
yes.
cheese
For
thing.
Denny Stone. I've never got to do this like a TV sign-off before. For Denny Stone, I'm Marcus Bridges. Stay fresh, cheese bags.
Thank you for listening to the H&M Trucking Podcast. Please leave a review, subscribe, and connect with Marcus over at the H&M Trucking social media channels. And if you're considering a job at H&M, find us at hmtrucking.com. Until next time, stay safe and ahead of the curve drivers.